Coming up on this edition of the Black Vault Radio, I sit down with a man who has traveled the globe, and based on his expeditions and archaeological digs, he will make you question modern-day textbooks about religion, history, and science. Biblical archaeologist Dr. Aaron Judkins.
Our excavations revealed new Dead Sea Scroll material culture in this cave. Now, having climbed the mountain looking back, it was the hardest thing I've ever done. His commander walked in and yanked a photograph from over his shoulder and said, "What are you looking at?" He said, "Nothing, sir." And he said, "That's right, you're not looking at anything." I don't try to convince anyone of my belief. That's not what I'm here to do. I'm here to present evidence.
All that and much more. So stay tuned. The Black Vault Radio is about to begin. More than 20 years ago, I began a journey. My quest for the truth. My name is John Greenewald, and I have hammered the United States government with Freedom of Information Act requests trying to get answers. I have more than 2 million pages of declassified documents for you to download at theblackvault.com. Now, I attempt to dive even deeper and talk to some of the most brilliant minds on this planet. No government secret is off limits, and no question is off the table. All I aim for is the truth. This is the Black Vault Radio. That's right, everybody. This is another episode of the Black Vault Radio. I am your host, John Greenewald Jr. Thank you so much for tuning in. I appreciate all of your subscriptions and comments and reviews on iTunes and all the places to subscribe to. If you haven't done so already, just check out theblackvault.com. There are buttons all over the place, namely top right corner of nearly every page. That'll link over to the show notes page and break down every episode, including how to subscribe. That being said, I want to start with some new additions on the Black Vault that appeared this week. Actually, one specifically that I think you might be interested in. And that is, namely, the FBI has declassified and released new cattle mutilation and animal mutilation related documents. Now, here's the backstory. For those who don't know, the FBI compiled about 131 pages of cattle mutilation, what they called animal mutilation records, quite a few years ago now. They've released it to the public. It's been out for quite some time. And they even put it on their online website. They called it the Vault. Now, I run the Black Vault, and it was quite a few years after I started that. When I started, it was 1996. The FBI named their online archive of declassified documents, because when I started, there really weren't any. They started their own archive, and they called it the Vault. Anyway, that's a show in itself. Neither here nor there. But that being said, they have on there different FBI files, various documents throughout the years that they've posted. One of which is on the animal and cattle mutilation phenomena. Now, although they don't say this specifically, they do give the impression that what they have on there is everything they have on that particular person or topic. For example, if you download the cattle animal mutilation document PDF, you get the 131 pages, and they make it seem like, well, that's everything we got. The problem is that's not true. Even though they don't say it, it's kind of implied when you download these things, because they don't say, there's 5,000 more pages, 500 more pages. They just kind of post it on there and give the impression that it's complete. That is not true. So what I've been doing the last few years is going through and cross-referencing what I've requested in the past already, but also what they've put online. And you can actually, when you file a FOIA request, ask for specifically the information they have on a particular topic or person, and then say you can omit everything that you have already posted online on the FBI's vault. So that's what I did with the cattle mutilation documents. To my surprise, those 131 pages are not all. It's not complete. and they sent me a short stack of pages about actually at least 12 cattle mutilation cases in the general Butte, Montana vicinity. They don't say exactly where, but in the general Butte, Montana vicinity. And they talk about a person that they actually describe in detail, suspect, that was using a Bell 47 helicopter to fly out to this farm, kidnap cows, fly them off-site, not too far, at least that's not the impression I got from the document, not too far off-site, drop the cow, land, get out, and either, depending upon the case, because again, they reference at least 12, remove sexual organs, or drain the cow completely of blood. Many characteristics of what you would see on a cattle mutilation case that maybe Linda Moulton Howe would talk about, or Chris O'Brien, or those leading frontrunners on the cattle mutilation phenomena. They would do this thing and then leave the cow, never taking any meat for food, not doing any what appeared to be satanic ritual or anything like that. They were just doing these weird experiments. So not knowing what a Bell 47 was, I looked it up and Googled it, and it's actually rather laughable that the FBI was saying that this Bell 47 would fly in, somehow grab a cow, or they would land or strap the cow. I don't really know. Look at this thing and try and figure out how they would do it. And on at least 12 occasions, go in, kidnap the cow, drop it off-site, do these weird experiments, fly away, and no one could ever find them. It was an unsolved case. At least these documents don't state that they caught anybody. They had multiple agencies involved. They had one witness say, well, the Bell 47 had a registration number starting with NZ. Now, that's Nancy Zebra. And they didn't know the rest of the registration number. So they meaning the FBI, they contacted the FAA. They tried to find out a little bit more about, hey, do you guys have anything? How can we look this up? Well, apparently, according to the document anyway, there are no registrations that either end with or start with or somewhere in the middle have NZs when it comes to Bell registered private helicopters, at least back in 1979 when these cases took place. The strange thing is, and this actually comes, I'm going to give him a plug. I hope he doesn't mind. But David Aiken, he is one of the investigators and consultants on my TBV Investigations crew that I've talked about. And he's a retired military officer, high-ranking. I don't want to give out too much personal information about him because I didn't ask him if it's okay if I say this, but I'm giving him credit because he submitted this letter to me, and he actually researched the Bell 47 helicopter. And he was intrigued by the post that I had sent out about these new documents. And so he started researching it, and I'm going to read this to you because I think that this is fascinating research on his part. I really didn't go this far. I just kind of looked visually at the helicopter and laughed. But David Aiken took it a step farther. And he sent me a letter. It seemed to me that a cow would be too heavy for the helicopter to lift. So I did some research on the Bell 47. I was right. The empty weight of the Bell 47 is 1,893 pounds. The maximum takeoff weight is 2,950 pounds, meaning the heaviest object it could lift is 1,057 pounds. An average adult cow weighs between 1,355 and 1,500 pounds. At a minimum, this would put the helicopter 300 pounds over its maximum takeoff weight. The elevation of Butte, Montana is over 5,500 feet above sea level, which would further reduce the maximum takeoff weight of the helicopter. Add warm air if it was summer, and the effective takeoff weight goes down even further. Also, all U.S. civil aircraft numbers start with an N, followed by a number, not another letter. Now, his military history gives him that knowledge, and there's obviously a reason why he is on the team. So a shout out to him, because that was beautifully said. Back to the documents, they're pretty amazing, because again, it makes it seem like, hey, this is a solved case. This is something that we, are dismissing, even though we never solved it. They just thought it was some troublemaker out there in a Bell 47. And yet, it just doesn't make any sense. And as David Aiken, who is, again, part of the TBV Investigations crew, pointed out, it's just not really physically possible for them to do this. The last note that I will give you on this is the fact that and this is, for me, the most interesting part, but I'll try and make it brief. When these documents were released, the 131 original pages that kind of comprised of the FBI's records on cattle and animal mutilations, it was the same era, 1978, 1979. All the documents are dated around the same time frame. So was this new document that came out, or at least it's new, I think. I've searched the internet. I've tried to find it. People write about this. Reached out to my friend Linda Moulton Howe, said, hey, have you heard of this? Quick glance, didn't ring any bells for her. So I think overall this is kind of brand new. But my point is when they compiled the 131 pages, in my opinion, I don't have proof of this, but it's kind of obvious, they must have strategically hid this document from the public release. They must have either denied access to it originally, or strategically made the decision, hey, we're going to keep this under wraps. We're not going to release it to the public, and kept it for themselves. They didn't release it. So fast forward, and then I go out and request it. I get it released, and it tells a pretty interesting story. One of which that, from a technological standpoint, not only does common sense tell you it doesn't make sense, but from a technical level, as evidenced by former military officer David Aiken, it just can't be that way. And that the FBI should have been able to figure that out, and yet they haven't. So I would definitely recommend, I'm going to link it in the show notes. If you're not familiar with how to get there, go to www.theblackvault.com/show notes. You are listening to episode number 6. My guest coming up is Dr. Aaron Judkins, also known as Maverick by his nickname. He's earned that nickname. He has traveled the globe doing multiple expeditions and unearthing some amazing finds and discoveries, and he will challenge what you believe. I guarantee it. From a religious standpoint and or a scientific standpoint, no matter what side of the fence you feel that you sit on, he will challenge it. I guarantee it. He's a very passionate guy. I'm really excited about having him on, and he is full of information, and he is somebody that goes to the field to get that information. So he's coming up. And lastly, this just in, apparently since our last broadcast here on the Black Vault Radio, JFK Jr. is still alive, and Buzz Aldrin admits that we didn't land on the moon. Now, I don't believe either one of these things, but these are now conspiracies that have been circulating, yes, just in the last week. Since I aired my last interview with Jefferson Morley, somehow these two conspiracies have now gained traction and are circulating. Now, I'm going to start with the fake moon landing first. Trust me, I am familiar with this theory. I come from a family who has a history rooted in the space program. My grandfather, who I never met, but my grandfather, we know for a fact, had a top-secret clearance, worked on rocketry and nuclear missile programs. A lot of that technology led to the Saturn V and taking our men to the moon during the Apollo era. So I have a personal vested interest in this. And on top of that, my father, John Greenewald Sr., worked for Rocketdyne and worked on the space shuttle. So when you see the space shuttle take off, see those big engines on the bottom, the biggest called the SSME or the RS-68, that's what my father worked on. That was his pet project. So the space program is very dear and near to me for obvious reasons. I also love conspiracies. So I looked into that whole fake moon landing thing many, many moons ago, pardon the pun, and dismissed it because there's no evidence to support it. In fact, it's rooted to a Fox documentary, and trust me, those things are rooted primarily in not fact, but more so entertainment. So I just don't buy any of those fake moon landings. There is a video that is circulated when Buzz Aldrin, who probably could have worded his answer better, especially to a little girl who asked him, why haven't we gone back to the moon? I'll link it in the show notes. You guys can listen to it. You know, Buzz Aldrin is a hero, a national hero. I'm not going to say anything bad about him. He's even got criticism for hitting a guy, literally close-fisted, just clocking a guy who accused him of being part of a cover-up. Now, I don't advocate smacking somebody around who believes in the moon landing theory, and I don't mean to offend you, but but that guy actually earned it. So I give Buzz Aldrin a thumbs up for that, but that's neither here nor there either. So moving on from that, the next conspiracy theory, to close that up, the moon hoax landing, whatever you want to call it, theory, just don't buy it. Listen to the video. Buzz Aldrin could have worded it better, but that's not what he said. He was answering the little girl, and again, probably could have been a little bit more polished, but it is what it is. Let's stop looking for these silly conspiracy theories. And the last one, the JFK Jr. thing, that's new. At least I've never heard about it before. But to my surprise, I've received multiple letters about it and mostly Facebook comments, and I think Facebook is where it's getting the most traction. No word on Twitter yet, or at least until somewhat recently. I'm not going to name names because it's not my place, but this is being perpetuated by one specific person, and I just don't buy it. I don't think, for multiple reasons, that this even has a remote chance of being true. Some of the evidence that's been put forward is laughable. But despite me dismissing it, why am I wasting the airtime talking about it? Because even though I love a good conspiracy theory, even though I love government cover-ups and secrets and so on, and there's a lot of them out there that are provable and have evidence, I draw the line when it starts disrespecting family and or family members, namely the Kennedy family, that although I'm not a big advocate for curses and all of that, if there is such a thing as a curse, I believe that the Kennedy family probably is cursed. And I think when you start dabbling in these conspiracy theories, and this is why I'm bringing this up, we have to remember that there's people, there's human beings on the other side of this conspiracy. The chances are, as history has proven with most conspiracy theories, there's no truth to it. The evidence that goes to support it generally is non-existent, made up, or people are reading into things that aren't there. I welcome you to challenge yourself and make up a conspiracy theory. Just make something up and then try and research it. And I guarantee you will find little shreds of evidence to give credence to that conspiracy you just made up. If you don't believe me, give it a shot. I've actually thought a lot about that over the years, where when you look hard enough for something, you will see it. Most, not all, most people that want to see UFOs are outside looking up, trying to see them. Look hard enough, you'll find it. I'm not saying they didn't see a genuine UFO. But what I'm saying is, when you look hard enough, you'll find something. But when it comes to these types of conspiracies, there is a morality line that we shouldn't cross. When you start accusing families of faking people's deaths and so on and so forth, if it's some guy in the middle of his basement and he's advertising it to his 12 newsletter followers, okay, well, that's kind of silly. Don't waste the time. When people that you see on television actually start saying it, and it gains traction, and people start listening, and people start paying attention, you really need to have some kind of supporting evidence if you're going to lay a claim like somebody, like from like a member of the Kennedy family, who was tragically killed, and he wasn't the only one from that family that was tragically killed, and I don't need to give you that history lesson. It's just crossing a line. So I urge you all, if you see it, don't perpetuate it. If there's evidence and I'm somehow proven wrong and JFK Jr. calls my toll-free line tomorrow and says, hey, by the way, so-and-so was right, I'm still alive, I'll issue an apology right then and there. I will do a show dedicated to how wrong I really was. Until then, I hope that you all just look into some of those silly rumors, dismiss them for what they are, and focus on those secrets and those conspiracies that actually do have supporting evidence, because those other silly ones, they give all of us a bad name who are really trying to make a difference and really trying to investigate things that need investigating. That being said, let's deal with some headlines, move on from all of that silliness, but I did want to at least bring it up, make mention of it to you, because, well, it's kind of big news in this whole genre field, this niche that we are all in of seeking the truth. Sadly, there's a lot of disinformation out there. I don't like the quote-unquote fake news phrase, but it's out there. We're all suffering from it. That being said, just be careful. Let's deal with some headlines, though. Some exciting stuff coming up on TBV News. In the TBV News segment, I want to talk a little bit about a personal story, but first I want to talk about a very sad headline. Now, back on April 13th, news circulated and surfaced and ultimately was leaked. It was against the family wishes. But late-night radio broadcaster Art Bell, obviously the start of the Art Bell Show and the original Coast to Coast AM, had passed away, and this was fairly unexpected. Obviously, there's some health issues. Now, the reason why I'm bringing this up is just today, at the recording of this broadcast, the coroner's report was released. Now, this is a sensitive issue because ultimately it was a accident, and it does tie into some medications that sadly were mixed when they shouldn't have been, and ultimately that led to Art Bell passing away. Now, I'll let you all look up the details if you're interested in it. It's not important to this story, but I wanted to at least kind of close that news story that has been going on since April. There's been confusion in the field of what really happened, and, sadly, there's these conspiracy theories that come along with it. This actually ties into something I said in the beginning of the show, and it's that morality line when we start talking about conspiracies and making accusations. Sadly, this is just a tragedy, and we leave it at that. But I wanted to tell you a quick story about my connection to art, and in fact, it goes all the way back to the beginning when I first started the Black Vault. I was 15 when I started the website. Going through 16 years old and 17, I was a senior in high school. And I got a telephone call from Whitley Strieber and producers related to his television program based on his book Confirmation, The Hard Evidence of Aliens Among Us. It was based on his best-selling book, and NBC was doing this 2-hour special. So Whitley called me to appear on that television show, and of course I quickly agreed. Talked with the producers, we talked about the story, and I appeared on the show. They recorded it, and it was a great 4.5 minutes of airtime on a national primetime broadcast. That's something that is pretty coveted. So in preparation for that show to air, they were doing publicity. And so Whitley called me again and said, hey, I want you to come on to this radio show with a man by the name of Art Bell. Now, although I had known obviously about art in the couple years I was in the field at this time, this was about 1997, 1998, I believe. Possibly 1999. I'm getting old, so they all kind of mush together now, all of those years. But so I, of course, agreed, and Art obviously played a role in inviting me on because that's his show. He didn't want any schlepper to come on there and bore everybody to death. And I remember appearing the first time on Art's radio program, and I was really scared. I'm wondering if somebody out there has a copy of it, because I don't. But this, again, was way back in 1998 era, and so they invited me on, and I got to appear with Whitley Strieber on Art Bell and answer questions, and it was my first big shot in radio. Meaning this was the first time that a major person was actually profiling the Black Vault. And after all this time, I've really kind of held a special place, not only for Whitley, but also Art, and the fact that he welcomed me onto that program and treated me like any other guest. I mean, who was I? I was still in high school, and, I was only in the field for a couple years, and yet here I was appearing with a powerhouse of a broadcaster, powerhouse of an author, and we were talking about my appearance on his television show that was going to be broadcast on national cable, and it was really a moment. It's something, and it was a long moment, actually. Art Bell's show was not short, but it was a moment I'll never forget. And Art and I, very on and off, more so off than on, sadly, stayed in contact through the years. I had appeared quite a few more times on Art's show, and then later on with George Norrie quite a few times, Barbara Simpson when she was airing it, George Knapp, I've been on with him as well. And so that relationship with the radio program for me continued. But really it was rooted with Art and Whitley's belief that I was able to do it. And as that teenager, I never thought I could, but sure didn't tell them that, and appeared on the radio program. So it's really sad that that chapter is closed, not only that he passes away, but that news now from the coroner's office is that it didn't really have to happen the way that it did. It was an accident. It's being ruled an accident. I'll link to the news article if you're curious, but my biggest advice, remember him for who he was and what he accomplished, and not necessarily for the sad and abrupt end that happened on April 13th, because that's very less important. But I did want to at least give you guys my connection to Art Bell, and it was one that I'll never forget. Now, moving on from that sad note, we get into the world of science from NASA. Now, in the last week, there's been a statement that there is a subsurface lake, possibly, on the Martian South Pole. Now, this comes from the European Mars Express spacecraft, and they used an instrument called, I'm going to have to read this here, Mars Advanced Radar for Subsurface and Ionosphere Sounding, or the MARSIS instrument. I'll tell you, say that 5 times fast. I had never heard of this before. I try and stay up to date with everything that's going on, but apparently they have enough data to feel comfortable saying that quite possibly there is a liquid lake underneath the surface on the South Pole. What confuses me, though, and maybe it's just me because some of these headlines are years apart, I thought we already knew that, or I knew that there was flowing water with heavy salinity that they found, but I also thought that they had found subsurface lakes, or at least evidence of it. I don't know. It's so hard to keep some of these findings straight, but that is something that was in a paper published just last week, and definitely big news on the life on other planets front. Obviously, I'm a big fan of news headlines like that, so whenever something breaks, I'll definitely give it to you. I feel dumb for admitting it, but honestly, I thought we already knew it, because when I saw the headline, I'm like, oh, wow, that's great. Then I started reading, I'm like, didn't I read this like 6 years ago? But no, it's all brand new, so definitely check it out, though. I mean, that's joking aside, it's amazing science, something that's definitely worth looking at. This month, now we're in August. Wow, last month, the Freedom of Information Act celebrated its 52nd birthday. The FOIA has been around for 52 years. I have used it for almost 22 of those years. Personally, I've filed, as I've mentioned before, about 8,500 FOIA requests. Now it's closer to 9,000. I'll have to get an exact count. But 52 years is a long time. And the online newspaper, The Hill, published an op-ed in the very end of July on the 31st. The title, The Freedom of Information Act at 52, New Challenges to the People's Right to Know. Why am I bringing this up? Well, the FOIA is something that we talk about, well, nearly every show, at least very much in brief, or documents that the FOIA has come out with. And why I am bringing this up, and I would recommend you all to read this, it talks about how the FOIA has morphed over the years, but more so with the current presidential administration. Now, again, I said this last show, it doesn't matter what side of the aisle you sit on. But sadly, in the first year of President Donald Trump's administration, and I'm going to read just this one paragraph of the op-ed because I think it's very important. In the first year of this administration, requests for information by newspapers, reporters, public interest groups, and ordinary citizens increased by more than 5%. To a record of 823,000 annually. Wow, I almost really ballooned that number up. That's how many I feel like I write personally sometimes, 823 million. But actually overall, 823,000 annually. Back to the article, quote, yet denials, and this is key, yet denials and censorship, known as redaction, climbed even faster. To all or part of 78% of records requested, according to a recent Associated Press report. That was actually an AP article back in March, I believe it was. And that talked about the growing number of redactions. The op-ed goes on to state waiting times for responses to FOIA requests at government agencies such as the Environmental Protection Agency, or EPA, grew by more than 20%, George Washington University's FOIA project reports. Now, it goes on and on, and I would recommend you look at this because it really kind of shines some light on the challenges that we all face if we use the FOIA or rely on information that is going to come out because of a FOIA request. Like I said, I send requests everywhere. I'm an equal opportunity hammerer when it comes to FOIA requests. I'll send them everywhere, but I try and be respectful that, there's humans on the other side too, so I don't sit and write 1,000 of them and send them over the course of 10 minutes to one particular office. I do try and be respectful to that and spread them out. But interest in government secrecy, government information is growing. Again, by the first year of Trump's administration, growing to the tune of 5%. However, it also is growing when it comes to the amount of redactions and censorship. So 5% plus the amount of requests that are going out. However, 78% of records requested are being partially or fully redacted and withheld. Those are amazing stats and kind of scary ones, especially when you do what I do and rely on the Freedom of Information Act to give us answers. If we're getting less and less answers, it's going to be more and more frustrating, and that obviously is a problem in itself. So pay attention to that article and the statistics, even though it might bore you with some of the talk about stats and numbers and percentages and FOIA law and documentation and this, that, and the other thing. It's important because a lot of the information that we get in our news every night, you see it from the newscasters, you see it in the headlines, you see it on these 2, 3, 4, 5-minute pieces on your nightly news programs. A lot of what's coming out in those pieces are from the Freedom of Information Act. And if we stop getting those answers, right? I mean, think about it. If that 78% number grows even higher, and we really start asking the government questions, and they're just completely throwing their hands in the air saying, we're not going to tell you that. That's national security. That's privacy reasons. That's exempted because of a statute, XYZ.59. Trust me, you get those denials when you use the FOIA. If that number grows, that's a fairly dangerous situation because then the public is left in the dark. Now, I don't want to sound doom and gloom, but these stats are very important because as the interest of the general public goes up and yet the amount of censorship and redaction goes even higher, that's a dangerous situation. So pay attention to all of that. Now, without wasting any more time, I'm excited to welcome Dr. Aaron Judkins. We are traveling all the way back in time to the biblical era, at least in part of our conversation, I hope, back to the time of Noah and the building of the ark and his expedition to Mount Ararat looking for the ark itself. Find out what happens when I bring on Dr. Aaron Judkins in the TBV Dialogue segment. In this episode's TBV Dialogue segment, I welcome Dr. Aaron Judkins, also known as Maverick. He is an author, explorer, and archaeologist hailing from the great state of Texas. He has a passion for searching for the truth about the mysteries of the past, exposing forbidden archaeology and forbidden history. He is also a producer, known for the 2015 documentary Finding Noah, which was all about the search for Noah's Ark, and also the producer of Hidden Mountain, the Los Lunas Mystery Stone, back in 2012. Maverick has participated in numerous excavations throughout the United States and Israel, and he is credited with mapping the longest contiguous dinosaur trackway in the Western Hemisphere, and for discovering a new trail of dinosaur tracks, which was named the Judkins Trail. Let me welcome to the show Dr. Aaron Judkins.
Hi, John. Thanks for having me on. I'm really looking forward to this broadcast.
Me too. And when I first met you a few years ago, I was really impressed, just not only by your background, but you're just an all-around cool dude, not to be too informal, but it was great talking to you at the MUFON Symposium. For those that don't know, I used to MC that event for quite a few years. That's where I met Maverick for the first time and was just really impressed by his background and the fact that he wasn't doing this in his chair. This is the guy that's actually going out. I mean, I don't know if you like this comparison or not, but you are like the real life Indiana Jones. A lot of people claim that. You actually really are when you look at your background. So let me pass it over to you. Tell everybody a little bit about your background. How did you get going with all of this research into forbidden archaeology and forbidden history?
Yeah, well, I've always had an interest in history and archaeology. It's always fascinated me because I wanted to learn about the past. So when I went somewhere, I wanted to learn about that spot. I live in the South, and so I have a avid interest in Native American history, and I always wanted to learn about the Native Americans and just the people who was here before me, and what happened, and what can we learn about that. There are lost stories of the past that seem to get just lost to time, and a lot of those stories are disappearing. I wanted to learn about that. And then, kind of the second part of that is back in 1996, I was watching an NBC special. It was hosted by Charlton Heston, and it was called The Mysterious Origins of Man. Mm-hmm. And I was blown away when I saw that go out on NBC. It got so much attention that they aired it 3 separate times on NBC on mainstream television back in those days. And I had been to a museum that had some of these, not all of them, but some of the original artifacts that they were showcasing on that NBC special. Mm-hmm. I had actually met a few of the people. I didn't realize the implications of some of these out-of-place artifacts. And so this whole documentary called The Mysterious Origins of Man really just blew my mind. And I thought, how come I've never heard about these artifacts? How come no one's ever said anything about out-of-place artifacts? I'd never heard that term, and it fascinated me because it went against everything that we have been taught regarding the standard evolutionary timeline of history, and that there was actually evidence coming to light that cut against the grain about that theory and about archaeology. Really, there was really just a sudden explosion.
Not to interrupt you, can you talk a little bit about what those artifacts were that kind of got you so intrigued? Like, what did you see in this show?
Well, yeah, there were several artifacts. For instance, the London hammer. This is a man-made artisan hammer that was encased in Cretaceous rock. Cretaceous rock goes back, according to the standard evolutionary geological timelines, of about 110 to 120 million years. Mm-hmm. Yet we have a man-made hammer with a colified wooden handle still attached. It was broken off at some point. The handle had been fractured off, but the hammer, the iron part of the hammerhead was still intact. It looked like a artisan's hammer, kind of a small hammer, but clearly man-made. Mm-hmm. Yet this was encased in rock, supposedly dating back to the time of the dinosaurs. Now, how does that happen? That rock is either 110 to 120 million years old, and you have to push man back that far in time, which even evolutionists won't do, or you have to say that rock is not really 110 to 120 million years old. There's something's wrong here. Mm-hmm. And it began to, all these questions began to come up is the dating techniques that they're using actually right? Is the interpretations of the evidence right? And this is one example. There's multiple examples. An iron pot found in coal, clearly a man-made iron pot with 2 little pour spouts on the end. I have museum replicas of these artifacts in my office now. Another one was a little fossilized human finger. We know that fossilization occurs in a very specific way. You have to have key elements for that to happen. It just doesn't happen. When the cow dies out in the pasture, it's not going to become a fossil. It has to have certain key elements for fossilization to occur. A number of scientists have been in the field. Dr. Sylvia Gonzalez in Mexico found fossilized human footprints in central Mexico, and she had a lot of researchers come down to study it. Even the BBC came down, and it really was fascinating until they realized the implications of what those human footprints meant, and they started to backpedal, and they said, you know what, look, this is going to change the land bridge theory that, people came across, down through the Bering Land Strait, and then they came down to the Americas from North America all the way down to South and Central America. But yet these footprints, when they dated them, gave a totally different timeline of when that occurred. So obviously somebody's wrong here. Either the data's wrong or their interpretation's wrong. And so they said, well, this data can't be right. So they reclassified the human fossil footprints down there as just being pot marks in the rock. And clearly, it's a bipedal human footprint that made those tracks down there. There's no question. Everybody came down there to look at it, and there's no question they're human fossil footprints.
Wow.
So there's somebody. So Dr. Gonzalez actually said, you know what? These are human fossil footprints. They're right in front of us. The evidence doesn't lie, and so they put a lot of pressure on Dr. Gonzalez. And, so when you're a scientist and you're in academia, you have a career and you have a reputation. And if you're getting academic pressure, scientific pressure by your peers to go a different way because it's going to ruin the theory that you've been preaching since Darwin, then you better fall in line.
Yeah.
Because if you don't, guess what? You're done. You're done. And there's many reports of this where people have reputable scientists have stuck with their guns, and they have had their careers ruined.
Yeah. Why do you think that is? Where the great thing about science is that it could be proven wrong. I mean, that's kind of the pursuit of the truth. That's why you're in the field. That's why you're doing what you're doing. Why is there this kind of inherent fear that if we quote unquote rewrite the history books, that's a bad thing? Why is that fear there?
Because it will show that they have been wrong. That theory has been wrong for a long time. Now look, when science should be self-correcting. So when you have new data that is confirmed as a scientific fact, then your theory should change. You don't change the science around your belief system. You change your belief system around the science. That's the way it should be. We all have theories. Look, we all come to the table with presuppositions and preconceptions. That's human nature. It's human nature to ask questions about our past and to find out where we've been, where did we come from, how did we get here, where am I going? Those are the great questions of life, man. And so part of this is, where do we come from? So it's in our human nature to ask questions. But look, scientist does not control science. Scientist does not control the actual data in the field, but they try. And so for years it's been, well, this scientist has said this is the way it happened, and because they have a white lab coat on and they're in the field of academia, well, this must be true. When really we have to question, is what they're telling us actually true? Because a lot of this evidence in the field is not matching up with what they've taught us for all these years. So it is a danger to the theory that they have really taught for all these years, because there's evidence coming to light in the field of geology, in the field of paleontology and archaeology that is showing something very, very different, a very different record of the past. Let me give you one example, John, that I'll touch on it briefly, but here's a very classic example of this. Dr. Mary Schweitzer, who was working for Jack Horner She is a paleontologist, and she decided to take a T-Rex bone, a fossilized T-Rex bone, and she cut it in half and made a very thin slice, and she put it under a microscope. And much to her amazement, she found red blood cells and soft, elastic tissue that had not been fossilized. That shouldn't be there. And so she said, this is kind of weird. So she did what any good scientist would do. She went through the scientific method. Now, that is to repeat the experiment. You try to predict the experiment, predict the outcome. You test it. You observe it. More importantly, John, you try to falsify that data. Because if you falsify it, you have to scratch your theory, and then you go back to hypothesis, which is stage one. And then as you move through the stages of the scientific method again, only when you cannot falsify that data after multiple repeated tests and predicted outcomes, then and only then can you move it to really a law. So she did exactly that. She made multiple slices, and over a period of weeks and weeks, probably months, she did, I think, if I'm remembering correctly, I think it was up to 21 slices of this dinosaur bone, and every one of them turned out exactly, was showing the same thing. Red blood cells that were still elastic with pliable tissue. And she took the tweezers, and you can see this pliable tissue. It's not fossilized. If this dinosaur bone was really 65 million years, why would there be fresh red blood cells in that bone? Why would there still be elastic tissue in that bone?
Is there a theory on why?
Well, the theory is because their dating system's not right.
Interesting. Okay.
So look, somebody has to be wrong here. The science is telling us maybe that dinosaur bone is not 65 million years. I know this goes against, it cuts against the grain of everything we've been taught. Dinosaurs and man were separated by 65 million years ago. When we were kids, we were all taught millions and millions of years ago. And maybe there's not millions and millions of years ago. I've studied this issue for a long time, and I know a lot of people have a hard time with this because really this gets back to another question, and that is the age of the Earth. And I've researched this for a long time, but I can tell you from my own research that what I've been taught was wrong. And so I know the Earth has an appearance of old age, but is it really that old? And so in my research, I'm having to look at this again and say maybe the Earth isn't really this old. Maybe it's not millions and millions of years ago. So this particular instance with Dr. Mary Schweitzer really rocked the paleontology community. And when it did, they were all shocked. But then they realized the implications of this data. Because, see, they just didn't do it in this one particular T-Rex bone. It was not an isolated case. They did it in multiple. As a matter of fact, our dinosaur dig up in Montana, which I had the honor and privilege of directing one of those digs back in 2010, excavating a Triceratops named Big John. And it wasn't me, but some of the colleagues that I know actually asked Dr. Jack Horner. And they said, look, let's do a double-blind study. And let's take this dinosaur bone. Let's take a dinosaur bone that we have excavated in Montana, and let's do a double-blind study, and we'll send it off independent labs, and we'll let them retest all this data and see if we can repeat this with different dinosaurs. Jack Horner refused because he realized that, hey, maybe we're going to lose this battle.
Yeah, maybe you're right.
Even though he refused, we sent this dinosaur bone off. We did the same experiments that Dr. Mary Schweitzer did and came up with very similar results in different dinosaur bones in different parts of the country. This is not isolated. This is showing us that dinosaurs maybe are not millions of years ago. Leonardo was a mummified dinosaur. It was not fossilized. It is mummified. So we have clear examples of the record of the past being catastrophic, not over eons and eons of time. So these are clear examples of forbidden archaeology, out-of-place artifacts, things that are contrary to what we've been taught. And that's what really intrigued me. When I started digging in the field, I started finding very similar things.
So I have to channel my 4-year-old son, Christian, and ask you this. And I'm actually not, this is a genuine question. I don't have the science background to answer this. When Jurassic Park came out, there was some criticism from scientists that, well, we didn't have true blood samples in the sense that when we can clone, and now we can, that wouldn't be able to happen. With the discoveries that you guys have made, which is kind of rewriting that part of the textbook, is something like Jurassic Park actually possible now?
No.
Okay.
As cool as that thought is, it's not. Now, we have discovered, I say we, people that are geneticists and that look at this. I'm not a geneticist, but look, I think they have found some particular DNAs, but I think they're fragmented. And so from what I know of it is that it's not possible, even though there is some that have been found. I don't know that they can actually recreate a creature such as a T-Rex. Why? Because the DNA is fragmented, and that means that you have missing genetic strands that are not there, and so it's not possible. Now, I know that I've heard reports that they're trying to clone woolly mammoths, for instance. They've found a multitude of those up in the Siberian part of the world, frozen in the ice or in the tundra. Even Alaska, they're finding. But can you do that? Now, I think they would have to splice. Actually, they would have to use a modern day elephant. And from what I've heard, that even at that time, even if they could, they would have to use a modern day elephant female to try to get the gene pool where they could recreate at least a partial mammoth. But it would take multiple generations, 5 or at least a half a dozen generations, for that to come back as a full 100% mammoth. Now, look, I don't know if all that's possible or not. That's speculation from what I've heard, and it's just it's part of the science. I know that they're trying to recreate a lot of these things. I don't know though that it would be the right thing to do. As cool as it would be to see the woolly mammoth again and a T-Rex, man, I have mixed feelings about bringing some of those creatures back, because maybe they don't get it right, and it's a whole different creature when it comes out. Maybe it's not exactly what the original T-Rex was, and maybe it's something totally different. I don't know, but it would be neat. Part of me would think, wow, that would be really cool to actually see something. But look, when I go out and look at alligators and rhinos, like these wonderful creatures, alligator turtles, and you have to think, these guys that were in the fossil record are just like they are now, without any morphological change. Now, I'm not saying there's not any kind of adaptation or mutational changes. There are variations. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the pond scum to Einstein stuff, where this whole thing's changing into something else. You don't see that. What you see in the fossil record of an alligator and a turtle and all these creatures are still the same. A bat is a bat, a scorpion is a scorpion, a dragonfly is a dragonfly in the fossil record. So we have numerous examples of these creatures that are still alive today that look exactly like they did supposedly all those eons of millions of years ago, back when they were all fossilized. But there's no change. The coelacanth is a great example of that. The scientists said the coelacanth fish died out in the Jurassic millions of years ago. Those guys are extinct. They found them in the fossil record. They're huge fish, and they said they had these vertical fins, and those fins evolved so they become limbs, so they could walk up on the land and turn into a mammal. Now, this is the stuff they're teaching our kids. This is what we were all taught. Yet, some fishermen in the 1950s off the coast of South Africa caught one of these in their nets. And so they brought it up. It was dead, and then they didn't know what it was. They threw it back. Well, the scientists, they said, wait a minute. We think you caught a coelacanth. And so they said, please, if you ever catch one, try to bring it in so we can study this thing. It was 15 years later they caught a live one in their nets. They brought it to the scientists alive, and they said, this is a living coelacanth. Mm-hmm. How can this be possible? These guys died out during the time of the Jurassic of the dinosaurs, yet they've got one living. National Geographic, and you can pull this up on your TV somewhere, National Geographic did an episode where they sent divers down, and I think these fish lived down like 600 feet to 1,000 feet, and so no one was able to see them or catch them. National Geographic sent divers down where they videographed, they filmed these coelacanths. And guess what? There is no morphological change in those fins. The coelacanth that's alive today is the exact same coelacanth that was alive back when those things were fossilized. The fins are the same, the fish is the same. Yes, they look prehistoric and they're neat fish and they're super large. They feed vertically, I think, and the reason for those fins is because they're kind of stabilizing fins. There was no change of millions of years of time with this fish. This fish didn't grow into a land animal and crawl up on the land. Mm-hmm. This is a great example of something that we've been taught as science was completely wrong. So again, I'm fascinated by this because in a lot of these areas of study in the field, there's evidence that comes up that says, wait a minute, this isn't how it is. So I think the interpretation of some of these things is completely wrong. And look, I'm open to learning about. Science is not bad. Science is good. Science is something we need. It gives us microwaves and space shuttles and fast cars. We've done these things, but that's because of operational science. Mm-hmm. When you're trying to study the past, it really is not operational science anymore. It's philosophical science, and this is where there's the confusion. The philosophical part of the science is we bring those preconceptions, presuppositions to the table, which is fine. That's normal. It's okay to do. I believe something because this is what I believe, but look, the science should be self-correcting, and it should point us to the truth. And when you don't change your mind, despite the evidence, there's a problem. I've had a lot of sacred cows slaughtered because I was wrong, and I've had to change my mind on some things and on some issues. But look, when you're dogmatic about the theory, despite the evidence, there's a problem. I like the phrase that, I can't remember who said it now, but it says that the facts are stubborn. There's something that no matter what you believe, sometimes the facts are just stubborn. Mm-hmm. And so anyway, that's what I think has fascinated me and driven me and to study in this field.
Before we move on to your digs and kind of getting a little bit more background of you in the field, let me ask just a point of clarification, going back to your comments about the coelacanth and how science has been wrong. Are you saying then that the amount of years, the age of the Earth, and the age of how we're dating some of these creatures back, are you saying that is wrong? Are you saying that the theory of evolution is wrong? Both? What exactly in your research do you feel is so wildly wrong when scientists make one claim, but we can prove another?
Well, look, they operate off the basis of evolution is true. So when you're talking about the age of the Earth and deep time, when you're looking at dinosaurs and the rock and you're trying to date these things, you're already trying to date it in an evolutionary theory of millions and millions of years of time. Now there's a lot that we can't go into here because it's such a deep issue, mm-hmm. and it's a very controversial issue. It's a hotbed topic. But look, my personal belief, because of the studies that I've done and the evidence that's showing that the Earth is probably not millions of years old, and we have to question, look, maybe we didn't descend from apes. Maybe there was something else that happened. There was an explosion of civilization that just showed up. There's no eons of time of slow evolutionary processes through the field of archaeology. Archaeology, civilizations show up. Mm-hmm. They're advanced. They have advanced technology, advanced knowledge. There's no slow evolutionary time in archaeology. The same way in writing. There's writing, how did they learn how to write? There's different forms of writing, very complex forms of writing, very old writing. But writing only goes back roughly 6,000 years in written history. How come writing doesn't go back any further than that? Well, because, they drew pictures and there were Neanderthals and cavemen, and no. This is something that people don't understand. We've been spoon-fed this stuff. So yes, I think they're wrong. I think their evolutionary timelines are wrong, and therefore it skews everything else that they do because they're operating off a false assumption. Now, some of them are sincere and genuine. They've just been taught wrong. Other ones who know still hold to this theory no matter what. So yes, I think they're wrong on both accounts. Why? Because the evidence in the field is not bearing out witness to the claim. Mm-hmm. Look, a great claim requires great evidence. And there's plenty of evidence to show that the record of the past is catastrophic. It's very fast, very sudden, and it was all happening at a very very extreme, volatile time in the world where the Earth flooded. And we see this in geology. So I know a lot of geologists and scientists don't agree with this. Why? Because it's how you look at the data and interpret that data. And so they interpret it through a set of lens that's very close to what they believe. Mm-hmm. And another set of lenses, hey, this is not quite exactly what we've been taught. So it really depends on how you're looking at the data and how you interpret the data. But the data is the data. The facts are the facts, and they don't lie. And so it's the interpretation of those facts that get skewed. So I think they've been wrong on the timelines because there's no other way that we can come up with a conclusion to say, well, maybe these timelines aren't millions and millions of years ago. Maybe there was something that happened very recently. I could go on with several different examples, but personally, now look, let me just make a side note here. I don't try to convince anyone of my belief. Mm-hmm. That's not what I'm here to do. I'm here to present evidence and to show you from the field about these anomalies, and some people call it forbidden archaeology. Some people call it out of place artifacts. Some people just call it evidence that's contrary to the evolutionary timelines. But look, I'm not here to convince you personally. I don't care. I know what I believe. And I've had, like I said before, I've had to change up some of the things that I believe now because I wasn't getting all the data. Scientists want to, some scientists and some academic circles want to try to control the information, and that is not science. Mm-hmm. Control of information is not science. That it needs to be presented to the people, and that's why it's so important that when it comes to teaching our kids about where we came from, that you're not teaching them one view of one particular thing. And so to me, it's a very personal issue. But look, there's plenty of evidence that's out there that says what you're teaching the kids is wrong. Look, let me throw out one example of a documentary that came out a couple of years back. It's called Expelled, No Intelligence Allowed. It was hosted by Ben Stein. Ben Stein's the guy in Ferris Bueller's Day Off. He's the teacher. He's got that monotone voice, and he's calling out the kids' names. And he's Ben Stein is a very smart man, and he did this film, and he interviewed Richard Dawkins, the foremost leading authority on evolution. And I'm not going to tell you any more than that, but I want you to go watch that film if you haven't already, because it shows you from an academic point of view of what they're teaching and how they're teaching it, and how they hold on to this thing so tightly that despite the evidence that flies in the face of what they're teaching, they still hold on to it. This is an important issue because when they're teaching our young kids about we came from pond scum to Einstein, we came from apes to monkeys, it says you're here for no reason, you have no hope, you have no future, you have no reason for being here, you don't know where you're going, and in the end, when you die, you're going to go back to the worms. That's what that theory teaches. Mm-hmm. And I have a big problem with that. Yeah. Because we're not here just by random chance. If we're here by random chance, then every life organism on this planet alone has to be here by chance. And we know that's not true.
Mm-hmm.
There's design in living systems. Now, I don't care if you're talking about plants or animals or the fish in the ocean. There is design, and you have to have a designer behind that design for it all to work. If it doesn't work, if one thing falls apart, it's symbiotic relationships. And if one thing falls, man, the whole thing. If the bees are eradicated from the planet, the crops and the plants and the flowers die. There's no pollination, and look, we're not going to have food. Mm-hmm. Bees are important. You got to have the sunlight and photosynthesis for the plants to work. Why? Because you're not going to have crops.
Yeah.
But if you don't have the sun, you're not going to have any of that. If you don't have all that working in a symbiotic relationship at the same time, designed with specific purpose, none of it's going to work. Life is a fine balance. And look, I've worked in the medical field, and I can tell you from an anatomy point of view that life is a delicate balance. And once you tip that scale to the left or to the right too far, life is fragile. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't mean that we're just happen to be here. So there's intelligence that's designed in living systems. If Darwin knew about the DNA, which he didn't know at his time, but if he knew about the DNA and the complexity of the eye, Darwin would have never, ever came out with his theory on evolution. He didn't start it, by the way. This wasn't a new concept of evolution. He got it from another guy, and a geologist. He's an amateur geologist called Lamarck. And it's not new to Lamarck. This goes all the way back thousands of years to ancient civilizations like Egypt and Greece and other civilizations who believed that because they didn't know about microbiology and the sciences like we understand now, they didn't understand where life came from. So they came up with these concepts in the best way that they knew how to understand from what they were seeing and observing around them. And they came up with this explanation to try to understand where they came from. But now we know better. So this I'm very passionate about this issue, but there's a lot more things that come to play here about why this is all important.
And I love that passion. It screams not only here on this interview, and that's a compliment, by the way, not a bad thing, but also when I met you, which is why I'm glad I brought you onto the show. Now, what I really liked about you, and I've already kind of said this, but I'm going to say it again because it leads into my next question, is that you are out in the field. You are not sitting at your desk. You're not sitting in a basement somewhere coming up with theories challenging science. You are actually basing what you are saying, and your passion is based on you in the field. Let's talk about, I know you've done a lot of different digs and archaeological expeditions. What have you been up to lately? Talk about some of your latest digs and what you've been doing.
Yeah, the latest dig that I've had, the last major dig, was in Qumran, Israel, in the search for a new Dead Sea Scroll cave. And this was back in 2017. We got permission to work with the IAA, the Israeli Antiquity Authority, along with Hebrew University and Liberty University, to excavate at a particular cave in Qumran. This is an area very close to the Dead Sea. Mm-hmm. This is the area in Qumran where they found the Dead Sea Scrolls in 1947, when the local two Bedouin shepherd boys found the original scrolls in Cave 1. There was 11 caves that were subsequently found from 1947 to 1957. Some of those caves were excavated by archaeologists. A lot of them were raided by the Bedouins looking for pots, the pottery, Qumran pottery, and Dead Sea Scrolls, once they learned the value of the scrolls. So there's not really been any work as an excavation in a cave in Qumran in the northern Engedi for Dead Sea Scroll material since that time. Mm-hmm. So we were the first team, really, since the 1950s to actually excavate in a cave in Qumran with full excavation procedures to see if we can find additional Dead Sea Scroll material culture. So there's a lot of illegal digging, people trying to get into the caves, and so there was a lot of things showing up on the black market, and there's hundreds and hundreds of these caves, and so with the permission of the IAA, we went in with the appropriate permits, and we were given a specific amount of time to excavate a certain cave, and much to our amazement, after several weeks of digging, this is an area that's very close to where the original Qumran cave of the Dead Sea Scrolls were found. And despite there being a survey done in 1993 of the caves, there's been no formal excavations. Our excavations revealed new Dead Sea Scroll material culture in this cave. It was originally labeled Cave 53 by the 1993 survey. That cave is now, although not official yet, but unofficially by the Israeli Antiquity Authority, has now been being called Cave 12, the 12th Dead Sea Scroll cave. So we found very significant Dead Sea Scroll material culture that really kind of rocked the whole thing. It's like hitting a grand slam in archaeology. You just don't find this stuff. But the fact that we found Qumran specific pottery, Dead Sea Scroll material culture, that even two tiny scrolls, one was on papyrus, one was on vellum, that we called in the Dead Sea Scroll cave expert, the authority on Dead Sea Scroll caves, and we called in the authority on Dead Sea Scroll, the scrolls themselves, and they both independently verified that this should be redesignated as Cave 12. So we made archaeological history back in 2017, and I was a part of that dig along with the group. So it was a very fascinating time to be involved in that, because that's really something that you just don't get to do every day in archaeology. You dig and dig and dig. It's very tedious. It's hot, labor intensive. And look, that cave dust, we had a couple of guys get sick in there, breathing in that cave dust. There's just all kinds of stuff floating around in that dust. And so there's a lot of work that goes into it. I can tell you it was physically taxing every day to go up, climb up to that cave and do all that manual labor. But I love it. I have a passion for it. And so now we have kind of broke new ground in cooperation with the Israeli Antiquity Authority in Operation Scroll. And so they have now rolled in their operation as a top priority now for Operation Scroll to commence.
Very briefly, because I want to make sure we have enough time for the Noah's Ark expedition as well. Very briefly, for those who don't know, can you just briefly explain the significance behind the Dead Sea Scrolls? Because that is an amazing discovery. But again, for those who don't know, what was the significance behind the Dead Sea Scrolls, and what did that do for history, archaeology, and Christianity, and how did that change things?
Yeah, so the Dead Sea Scrolls are the single greatest archaeological find from the 1940s to this time. It is the single greatest archaeological find ever, and that still stands true today. The significance of the Dead Sea Scrolls is that it goes back 2,000 years, back to the time even before Jesus, where the Essene community broke away from Jerusalem, and they wrote every book of the Old Testament on these scrolls. Every book of the Old Testament, with the exception of the book of Esther, is found in the Dead Sea Scrolls and validated the Old Testament scriptures. Historically, in archaeology, look, it's one thing to find a little piece of pottery. It's another thing to find scrolls with writing on them. Writing changes everything. Because look, when you find something, it's a piece of the puzzle, and it's a very small fragment piece of that puzzle, and you try to insert it into what you know, into the context of where you're at and what happened, and it gives you a little bit of information, and so you can try to add to the knowledge base of the time period of what happened there. Writing changes all that because it is a anchor point in history. We know the writing, we know probably who wrote it, we know exactly what it says, we know how old it is, we probably know the context of the people who wrote them. It gives you a lot more information when you find writing. This writing in the Dead Sea Scrolls, multiple copies of Genesis, Isaiah, Psalms, etc. For example, the great Isaiah scroll was completely intact, and it was written in the modern block Hebrew, which went out of favor in about 500 BC. There were some other manuscripts that were not even biblical manuscripts. Some of these were community scrolls, community rule scrolls that had laws and ordinances about how to live in the community. A lot of them were not even biblical texts at all. Even the book of Enoch was found amongst the Dead Sea Scrolls. That's an apocryphal book. So look, the Dead Sea Scrolls confirm the written historicity of the scriptures of the Old Testament, every book of the Old Testament with the exception of the book of Esther. So this is extremely important in archaeology because it shows that the people who wrote these scrolls thousands of years ago are still preserved to this day, and what was written in the past has now been proven out in archaeology. So it validates the veracity of the historicity of the Old Testament scriptures. That is the single greatest archaeological find to date.
Well, congratulations for being a part of that. That's an amazing thing. I didn't actually know that they were that in-depth and gave that much information. So, again, my congratulations to you. What I want to make sure that I have enough time for is your expedition on Noah's Ark. You were involved in the film and a producer of Finding Noah, which I know came out a couple years back. Can you tell me about not only the film, but more so your expedition to Mount Ararat and what you were trying to accomplish?
Yeah, so back in 2013, I was invited to be a part of this expedition that was going to be the last major scientific push to find the Ark. And I had been invited on a dig back in 2010 in the years past, but I just, it's time and money, and I just couldn't go because of both of those reasons. This is a major expedition. Finally, in 2013, they said, we really need you. Can you come? And I said, yes. I don't know how I'm going to get there, but I'm going to be there, put my name down. And so, long story short is that the expedition funding came through, which is in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. And what we didn't realize is that eventually that we would sign on a film crew from Hollywood to document a documentary of us searching for the Ark. So none of us signed up because of a documentary film. We didn't know about that till about 3 months afterwards. But I ended up becoming associate producer of that film, and we got the funding that we needed, and we sent a lot of scientists, including myself, up that mountain to a specific location on the eastern plateau to search for Noah's Ark. I can tell you, now having climbed the mountain, looking back, it was the hardest thing I've ever done. It was the hardest expedition I've ever done in my life. I trained very hard before I left for Ararat, and I'm so glad I did. But there's a point it becomes kind of a mental thing where you have to push through that mental barrier when you're physically taxed. That mountain really challenges every person, every man, every woman that climbs that mountain. It's challenging. And even our director of photography for Finding Noah, who's climbed Everest, told me, he said, climbing Mount Ararat is actually harder than climbing Everest. Even though Everest is higher, Everest don't have some of the dangers that's very unique to Mount Ararat. So I was very humbled by climbing that mountain. It was a very miserable experience.
What's the elevation of it? What's the elevation?
It's 17,000 feet.
Wow.
It's That's where you start climbing, kind of at the base camp where Everest starts, is at 17,000. But the unique dangers around Ararat's very, very unique, that Everest doesn't have. Large boulders, falling rock, earthquake prone area. It's a volcanic mountain. You have these roaming wild dogs that roam in packs. You have the PKK organization that controls the mountain access and what goes on the mountain. It's a military conflict zone between the PKK and the Turkish military. It's right close to the borders of Iran and Russia. So this has been a hot zone militarily for years. Mm-hmm. So it's a very unique set of challenges surrounding with Ararat. Plus, it's permanently capped glaciers on the top, and it's the largest landmass. It's about 400 square miles of territory, which makes it the largest landmass mountain on the Earth. So very, very extreme conditions. Even on the northwest side of the mountain, the Ahor Gorge is twice as deep as the Grand Canyon, and they've had climbers that have gone missing that have never been found ever.
Wow!
And so we showcase some of those things in the film Finding Noah, that went out to theaters all across the country in theaters back in 2015. So if you didn't see it, it's available, I think, on some of the normal distribution channels like Amazon and things like this. We do have, I do have some DVDs that I make available on my website at aaronjudkins.com.
Yeah,
but that's our.
Let me jump in. For those that are listening, want to look into that film, it's www.aaronjudkins.com. So aaronjudkins.com. You can get that film. We're kind of approaching towards the end with the last 10 minutes of my hour that I got with you, but let me just kind of ask you before we get to some of the audience questions as well. When you're up there, obviously it's dangerous, obviously it's treacherous, obviously it's physically challenging. But on top of all that, as you guys are meeting this challenge, you're hunting for evidence of Noah's Ark. Did you guys find anything up there?
Well, there's what they call the Ararat anomaly, which is a kind of a strange formation that, according to back in the 1950s and 60s, when the military was using U-2s and SR-71s to do high recon over that area, they would fly over the Ararat region. And some of these photos that were taken over Ararat from these U-2 and SR-71 missions were finally declassified by the CIA in 1995. Mm-hmm. Those photos were released. It's called the Ararat anomaly. And according to these documents, the CIA first encountered this. Really, they started looking into it in about 1974. And they were curious about this area, approximately between 15 and 16,000 feet, when the U.S. Air Force captured the first images of a strange object from this 1949 military surveillance operation that they conducted. Even Colonel James Irwin, who was our Apollo 15 astronaut who went to the moon, spent the remaining part of his life when he retired out of the military NASA to make it his life's mission to search for Noah's Ark on Mount Ararat, because he said he flew over an object when he was flying in the military that resembled something that was an anomaly. So he spent the last remaining years of his life searching for that object. I think he made 9 climbs up Ararat, nearly losing his life on one of those climbs about 3 years before he died. Nearly died on the mountain when he fell. So numerous agencies have captured this image of this Ararat anomaly. The Landsat 1970s, a French SPOT satellite 1989, even the NASA Space Shuttle in 1994. And the CIA has been capturing these detailed images through satellite surveys since the 70s all the way out through the 90s. in 95, these were declassified. So we have numerous reports that we talk about it in the film from a guy named David back in 1968 who worked at the Smithsonian, who saw images of this Ararat anomaly, was told not to say anything about it. From Dudley Thomas in 1980, who was worked on a nuclear submarine. In that year, there was a particular ice melt on the mountain. He said, according to the military and intelligence agencies, there was an anomaly that was discovered on Ararat in that time period. And then in multiple other sources that have looked at this anomaly on Ararat. Mm-hmm. I had a friend who used to work for, he was a Marine, and he told me off the record that his job was to look at documents and surveillance documents, and he had showed up early, and he had started going through some of the photographs, and one of them, as he was going through waiting on his commander, one of them said anomaly on Ararat, and when he was looking at it, his commander walked in and yanked the photograph from over his shoulder and said, "What are you looking at?" And he said, "Nothing, sir." And he said, "That's right, you're not looking at anything."
Wow.
And it was basically was told to leave it at that. So there are numerous reports of something being on Mount Ararat.
Was your expedition able to kind of use that photographic evidence, the declassified documents, to figure out exactly where it was on the mountain? Were you able to get there, or were the photographs kind of hard to discern where exactly this anomaly was?
There's multiple target sites.
Okay.
We were using some of this data from the declassified documents, some real-time data from satellite imagery, also going back to the historical sources like and accounts and eyewitnesses such as Ed Davis in 1946. We had Ed Davis. We do have Ed Davis's testimony. He passed away now, but we do have his testimony that he gave this eyewitness account that he went up there. It's a very interesting story. I have those available on audio CD. If anyone's interested in listening to Ed's testimony, it's a very credible account and is considered by most ARC researchers the most credible account of a modern day eyewitness to an ARC sighting. Very, very interesting story. But yes, there is an anomaly on Ararat, and our target mission was a particular site on the mountain to see if we can't verify the superstructure on Greater Ararat in eastern Turkey.
Now, I don't want to blow anything in the movie, so if you don't want to answer, I understand. But when you came off the mountain, did you find anything then when it comes to these anomalies? I know you had a couple target sites. Can you talk a little bit about, did you collect a physical evidence? Did you see anything, or do you want to save that for the film?
I'll save most of it for the film. I can tell you we collected samples of some things and some things that we were able to bring down off the mountain and to send off to labs to get tested. We have those reports now. Mm-hmm. The expedition to Ararat is still ongoing. The research is still ongoing, and there's still numerous places. I say numerous. There's probably one or two additional places that we need to look at. But I can tell you from experience, some people say, "Well, why can't you just go up there to find it?" It's not that simple. When you're looking through, 60 to 100 to 200 feet of ice, it's very, very difficult. It's like me telling you to go down to the Grand Canyon. That will make it twice as deep as the Grand Canyon is now. We'll give you 400 square miles, and we're going to bury something down there in about 3 or 4 different locations, and we're going to tell you to go find it. By the way, we're not going to tell you exactly where. You got to find the location, and then you got to get to it, and then you got to start searching for it. That's how difficult this is. It's not a very easy operation. We've had a lot of things that happen just being able to get the permit alone and getting up that mountain is incredibly difficult.
Yeah.
Then you got to start searching. I think the film Finding Noah documents that very, very well. There's a lot of science that went in behind this, and it's a great documentary film. It's narrated by Gary Sinise, produced by Brett Baum, also produced by Matthew Marsden. I got to know these guys for 2 months and live with these guys for 2 months in eastern Turkey. So it's very, very interesting what we did find and what we didn't find. And so, as I said, if you haven't seen the film, it's still available out on DVD or on some of the distribution channels. It's called Finding Noah, and it's one of the probably the highlights of my archaeological career.
As it should be. It's well done. I would recommend anybody to go check it out. You can see the links to it on the show notes page, again, aaronjudkins.com. But if you want kind of a condensed version of everything we've talked about, I'll link to his website, How to Find Finding Noah, at www.theblackvault.com/show notes. That will go ahead and link to everything that we've talked about this episode. Now, the last thing I'm going to ask you before I open the mailbag to audience questions here in the last couple of minutes, after everything that you experienced up there, climbing the elevations and, pretty much facing nature head on, are you going to go back?
I would go back, not to the same area. Mm-hmm. It would take a lot to get me back, though. It would have to be some really good intel for me to go back, just because of the dangers of climbing that mountain. But would I go back if the appropriate intel was there, and if everything lined up for me to go back? I would go back. But it would not be just on a whim. It'd have to be some really good scientific, some hard data.
Yeah. Glutton for punishment, I guess. Let me open the mailbag. This is the TBV mailbag segment. We only have a couple minutes left. With Dr. Aaron Judkins, I invite you all to subscribe to all of the Black Vault social media channels. You'll get notified, sometimes fairly short notice, other times a little bit more notice, on submitting your questions. These came in for me to ask, and I'm just going to kind of go through these one by one. Feel free to, just keep it short, because I know we're running a little bit short on time. But okay, I do want to get to these. The first one that came in, Scott in Tallahassee, Florida. He is asking, with your field experience and expeditions, he asks, do you find a connection between all these ancient alien theories and the advanced civilizations of history?
What some people would call ancient aliens, I don't define as ancient aliens. Yes, there's a connection in the advanced technology and advanced knowledge side. Yes, I don't call it ancient aliens. I went to Peru and Bolivia. I've been to Pumapuca and Tiwanaku. I documented this. It's on my website if you're interested in watching the film. It's called On the Trail Across Peru and Bolivia. I also have an expedition journal up about that expedition. I give my thoughts on a lot of these sites I've gone to. Also on the one on Noah's Ark, there's an expedition journal up on that too. I would recommend you go watch the film. It's available online or as a DVD. Read the book, and I go into all those details very solidly and very detailed. So I would recommend watching or reading the book on that. But I don't define it as ancient aliens.
I always might struggle with those theories and stuff because I don't buy into it. And again, this is a show in itself, but very quickly, I don't think that gives humanity the credit it deserves for the advancements that the human mind has taken on its own. Sometimes we're just amazing as a human race, and I think that some people fail to realize that, and if they don't understand an advancement, it's got to be aliens, and then they just throw that in there. But anyway, like I said, show in itself. Here's another question. Nickname Mega Man 1987. Boy, I missed that game, Mega Man 1987. Here's the question. I remember growing up, and religion teachers in various schools I went to taught religion in different styles. I am a skeptic about anything from the Bible, but maybe that upbringing is to blame. Is there a story in the Bible that you feel society ignores, but they should pay attention to more because you feel it is the documented truth, but people just don't get it?
Well, look, we've all had these experiences for the most part, growing up either being taught a particular religion or religious view or philosophy, and then you grow up and you question those things. Look, that happens to all of us. It happened to me. I would say that's normal. It's healthy to be skeptical. We should be asking questions about what we believe, more importantly, why we believe it. I did that myself when I was about 21. I would encourage you to do the same thing, look into the evidence. Yes, I think there's a particular thing in the Bible that would clue us into a solid record of the past, and that is the remains of Noah's Ark on Mount Ararat. If Noah's Ark is found, I don't think if it's really if, I think it's when, but I think when it's actually revealed to the public that it is there, I think that'll change everything we know. It'll certainly scream out that we didn't evolve from apes because of the creation account that is written from thousands of years ago. I think that will change everything we know because it'll change about the belief system about how man got here. And so this particular story in Genesis, I think there's a historical account of truth to it. Mm-hmm. I know that there is throughout archaeology, throughout geology and paleontology about the record of the flood. So does the ark exist? That would be probably the greatest archaeological find since the Dead Sea Scrolls. That's kind of what my mission is as well. I don't have to find it to believe it, but look, it would be a great testimony if we could find something like this. If we don't go, we won't know. And so my mission is to go and find these things out, not just Ararat and Mount Ararat and Noah's Ark, but other things. So I think the Noah's Ark account in Genesis would be a great archaeological find since the Dead Sea Scrolls, and that's what I hope in the coming years we can find.
And here's the last question, and then I'll let you go. This one comes from Neville in the United Kingdom. And Neville, thank you for your question. I'm going to switch it up a little bit just based on Dr. Judkins' answer here in the last minute or two. So Neville had asked about, I'm going to paraphrase this one, asked about the kind of more of a metaphorical interpretation of the Bible versus a literal. Now, where I'm morphing this is we just talked about Noah's Ark, and some people kind of say, well, that didn't happen or is not documented. It's more metaphorical. This goes back to Neville's question. He's asking, do you feel that stories are more metaphorical? But it sounds like you're saying this possibly is more literal, that it actually happened. He's asking, how do you respond to people that say things like that when they ignore the evidence?
Look, the Bible, when you're reading the Bible is very clear about what's metaphor and what's literal written history. When there's a metaphor or a parable that is given, it is called a parable. And that is not the same as saying that this was a literal thing that happened. The Bible is very clear and defines those that are parables and defines those that are history. And so the Bible makes a very clear distinction about what it's telling its readers. There's no confusion about what is parable and what is recorded as history. If I know that can be confusing, growing up and hearing what are so-called stories, but look, written accounts throughout almost every indigenous culture around the world. There are some say up to 500 ubiquitous flood legends from civilizations around the earth. Now, if that didn't happen and they're all separated, how would they even have a flood legend? Even the Incas have a flood legend. The Native Americans have a flood legend. This goes all around the earth in some 500 ubiquitous cultures. So, yes, I think there's a seed of truth that's embedded in the past. Over time, it's got lost to time, or it's been flawed, or there's been some mythology or legend put in there, and that kind of gets relegated to legend over time. But the Bible's very clear in what's written history and what's parable or given a comparison to. So I would just encourage you to look at those differences and distinctions. And if you need some more examples, I can give those later. But look, if you have any more questions that we're not answering here because of time, just go on my website and just go to the contact tab, and I'll try to answer as many as I can. But look, I love to connect with people there. That's the social hub of all the media, and everything that I do is at my site, aaronjudkins.com.
I really appreciate your time. There's one thing I've learned, and that is I could talk to you all day long and ask you questions and pick your brain. Thank you so much, and I do appreciate all of those question submissions. Like it was just said, visit www.aaronjudkins.com. I'll link everything in the show notes page, but definitely drop him an email. He's a great person to speak to, and someone that's full of knowledge, and he'll challenge your beliefs, as you can tell from the last hour or so. But that's something I respect highly about him. So thank you so much for joining me. I really do appreciate it.
Yeah, John, thanks for having me on the Black Vault. It was a very fast-paced show, and I really enjoyed it. Thanks for having me on.
You too, and thank you. Although that concludes my interview with Dr. Aaron Judkins, don't go away. Coming up, I just put online an often cited but rarely seen record from 1968, and it is responsible for changing the field of ufology forever. That's next on TBV Unredacted. In this episode's TBV Unredacted, I am going back to the paranormal a little bit because this is a follow-up to a news story that I did a few episodes ago. Now, the news story was about the release of the History Channel's Project Blue Book. I expressed a little bit of my concern that the information was not necessarily historical. So my fear is they're going to take an amazing story like the one of Dr. J. Allen Hynek, twist it, contort it, make it entertainment. Yeah, it might be a great show. I mean, it looks very cool. Production value is very high. They got some great actors in there. I got no complaints on that front. Take my producer hat on and put my UFO side on. That's a little bit of a different story because I'm concerned that if they veer too far off from history and it's not historically accurate, then that's going to be a little problematic. Well, in this segment, in TBV Unredacted, I want to profile something that you've probably heard of before, but have actually never seen. Now, based on a little bit of the popularity of that show and the hype of what's coming out, I decided to track down an original copy of the Condon Committee report. I was able to find this at an agency called the Defense Technical Information Center, or the DTIC. Now, online, you might be able to find a full version, and in fact, I know some versions are out there in text form. Somebody actually typed it in, or at least the majority of it. I haven't gone line by line. I don't know how accurate they are. But the Condon Committee report was instrumental in the cancellation of Project Blue Book. Now, this particular study was done by the University of Colorado. And ultimately, back in 1966 through 1968 at the University of Colorado, they were tasked with studying all of the UFO cases and evidence that the United States Air Force had collected and ultimately investigated through projects Sign, Grudge, and Blue Book from the years 1947 through, again, 1966, and then they ended the study in about 1968. They wanted to look at all of the information that they had received. Did it make sense to keep investigating? Was there a threat to national security? Was it an important topic to look into? All of these questions they tried to answer. Now, ultimately, here's the summary. They felt that there was nothing to the UFO phenomena. They felt that there was no national security threat. They felt that it was not beneficial to continue investigating UFOs. So therefore, they issued their recommendation to just ultimately shut everything down. Towards the end of 1969, the Condon Committee report was published in 68. Then in 1969, Department of Defense and the United States Air Force issued the press release, "We're not going to investigate UFOs anymore." Technically, January of 1970 is when Project Blue Book ultimately shut down. And that was it. They claim that there is no interest in UFOs. They are not a threat. And don't bother us if you have any cases. At least that's what they said. Now, the Condon Committee report, again, often cited, is very rarely seen. So I tracked down the entire report that, again, was from the DTIC. 1,425 pages. I actually didn't know it was that huge. I knew it was lengthy, but I didn't know it was quite that lengthy. And I posted it here in the last week. Now, I know in the beginning of the radio show, I talked a little bit about another document that I had posted. That, I believed, was a little less deserving of TBV Unredacted, more so deserving to be in the beginning of the show, because I felt that that was pretty important. Although this is still important, this is more historical, and I wanted to at least profile it because even though the Condon Committee, in my opinion, was wrong, even though their conclusions, I believe, were misinformed, it is still an important piece of history because it goes into great detail about the UFO information and what led to the closure of Project Blue Book. It's one thing to read text, computer text that somebody typed in, another thing just to read a summary. But if you're really into the UFO research and you really want to prove the cover-up, because I believe the cover-up is easily provable in this era, that they were ignoring important information, that they were not looking at this with a true scientific objective, that they were just simply a debunking mission, that's what I believe. This report played a role in all of that. So I think it's important that we have access to it. Now, in order to download those 1,425 pages, at least in short, I would just skim through it and look at it and see what kind of information they actually looked at. You can go to www.theblackvault.com/show notes. You are listening to episode number 6. My guest this episode was Dr. Aaron Judkins. I hope you learned at least one thing throughout the last hour and a half or so, because it was a lot of fun for me to bring it to you. It was a lot of fun for me to talk to Dr. Judkins, pick his brain a little bit, and hear about his discoveries. You may have something to say. You may want to talk about the Condon Committee report. You may want to comment on those headlines that I talked about earlier. Whatever it may be, I invite you all to log on to the community section of the Black Vault. That's theblackvault.com/community. That is the message forum. You can jump in there. There's a lot of conversations that are actively going on as I speak to you right now. You can log in, read a bunch of stuff that goes back years. There are thousands and thousands of things to read, but just jump in, take a part in it, and talk about your thoughts about what I've said. If you disagree with me, awesome. Post it in there. Let me have it. Definitely read that Condon Committee report, or at least part of it, because, again, I think it's an important piece of UFO history, very rarely seen in its original form. Thank you so much for listening. I really do appreciate it. It's always a lot of fun for me to bring these episodes to you, and I hope you're enjoying them. Thanks so much, and we'll see you next time on the Black Vault Radio.